Hello friends, welcome to the HFY Ode, where we bring you the new science fiction stories for you, and new adventure, new world. Yeah.
You want to know what real fear smells like? It's not smoke or blood or the cold void of space. It's the scent of 100 aliens holding their breath at once. Watching a single human woman step out of a broken airlock with a welding torch in one hand and a ration bar in the other. And that is exactly where my story begins. The first time I saw Alara Vance, she was throwing up into a recycled air toilet on the troop transport Valiant. We were 3 days out from Proxima Station, and she had spent most of that time either crying, dry heaving, or apologizing to the bulkheads. She was 22 years old, barely 120 pounds soaking wet, with a nervous laugh that sounded like a frightened bird, and the worst case of jump sickness I had ever witnessed. I remember thinking, this is the best the Seoul Defense Corps could send us. My name is Commander Thalen Voss, and I am not human. I am Ktharn, from the high-gravity world of Vorka Prime. My species stands 7 feet tall on average, with dense bone structure for arms, and a reputation for never backing down from a fight. I had served in 3 intergalactic campaigns before my 100th year, and I had seen horrors that would crack a human mind like an egg. So when the war with the Veth Collective started going sideways, and the Galactic Assembly begged for reinforcements, I was not impressed when Earth offered up a single platoon of specialized personnel. The Veth Collective were not like us. They were not like anyone. Imagine a species that had evolved past the need for individual bodies, a hive mind of crystalline entities that communicated through resonance frequencies and thought in geometric patterns. They did not feel pain. They did not feel fear. They did not negotiate because negotiation implied a shared reality, and the Veth had long since decided that their reality was the only one that mattered. They had been expanding for 3,000 years, consuming star systems the way a black hole consumes light, and every species that tried to stop them had been either assimilated or erased. We were losing, badly. The Ktharn battle fleet had been reduced to 40% strength. The Xylos Syndicate had abandoned 3 key outposts without firing a shot. The Avelian hierarchy, who had once boasted of their psychic defenses, had gone silent after the Veth cracked their homeworld's moon like an eggshell and dropped it onto their capital city. By the time the Assembly called for volunteers to hold the Meridian Corridor, a vital trade route that the Veth needed to breach the inner systems, almost no one showed up, except the humans. And they sent her. The Valiant carried 200 human soldiers, plus support staff. I had studied human military history before they arrived because that was the kind of commander I was. I knew about their world wars, their nuclear close calls, their desperate scrambles into space. I knew that humans had a reputation for being unpredictable and stubborn, but also fragile and emotional. They lived barely a century. They bled red. They cried when they were sad. They laughed when they were nervous. They were, by every objective measure, one of the softest species in the Assembly. So when the transport docked with my flagship Stormbreaker, and I saw Alara Vance stumble down the ramp with her duffel bag dragging behind her, and her uniform 3 sizes too big, I did something I'm not proud of. I looked at my first officer, a weathered Ktharn named Zavok, and I said, if these are the best they have, we are already dead. Zavok, who had learned long ago not to argue with me, simply grunted. The human commander was a barrel-chested man named Colonel Marcus Webb. He had the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from old wood, weathered, hard, and deeply unimpressed by everything around him. He saluted me, which I found strange, and then he introduced his troops with the casual ease of a man showing off a used vehicle he was trying to sell. This is 2nd Platoon, Echo Company, Terra Marine Corps, he said. They're quiet. They follow orders, and they don't quit. That's all you need to know. I looked over the assembled humans. They were small. All of them. Compared to my Ktharn warriors, they looked like children wearing armor. Their weapons were kinetic projectiles, primitive slug throwers that fired solid rounds. And their body armor was a flexible ceramic composite that would not stop a single Veth resonance bolt. Their medical kits contained bandages and painkillers and something called epinephrine, which I later learned was basically a chemical that forced their hearts to beat faster when they were about to die. I turned back to Colonel Webb. Your species has no psionic defense. Your ships are slow. Your weapons are antique. Your soldiers have a lifespan shorter than my last deployment. Explain to me why the Assembly accepted your offer. Webb's face did not change. Because we were the only ones who said yes. That was the moment I should have realized something was different about humans. Not because of what Webb said, but because of how Alara Vance reacted to it. She was standing at the back of the formation, still looking pale and seasick, but when her commander spoke, she straightened up. Just a little. Just for a second. And in her eyes, which were a pale, watery blue, like ice melting in a glass, I saw something that looked almost like hunger. But I dismissed it. She was the weakest link in a weak chain, and I had a war to fight. The briefing that followed was grim. The Veth had pushed through the outer rim and were massing at the mouth of the Meridian Corridor. If they broke through, they would reach the core worlds within 6 months. The Assembly's plan was simple. Hold the corridor for as long as possible, bleed the Veth, and hope that someone somewhere invented a miracle. Our job was to defend Station Theta 7, a refueling depot built into a hollowed-out asteroid at the corridor's narrowest point. Station Theta 7 was not designed for combat. It was designed for refueling. It had thin walls, exposed conduits, and a civilian population of about 3,000 workers and their families. The Veth would reach it in 72 hours. We had 2 Ktharn cruisers, 1 Xylos frigate that leaked radiation, 200 human marines, and a prayer. That night, I walked through the human birthing area to observe my new troops. What I found did not inspire confidence. Most of them were sleeping in shifts, their faces slack and young. A few were playing cards on a crate, laughing at something I did not understand. One was writing a letter, which struck me as absurd. Who writes letters in the middle of a war? And then I found Alara Vance. She was sitting in a corner of the cargo bay, surrounded by tools and parts. She had taken apart her standard-issue rifle and was reassembling it with her eyes closed. Her hands moved with a precision that surprised me, given how much she had trembled during the docking procedure. I watched her for a full minute before she spoke. "You're staring, Commander." Her voice was quiet, almost soft, but there was no fear in it. Just observation. "You reassemble your weapon without sight," I said. "Why?" She opened her eyes and looked up at me. In the dim cargo bay lighting, her face looked younger than her 22 years. But her voice was older. Because in the dark, you can't always see what's trying to kill you. But you can always feel your rifle. I tilted my head. That is not a tactical doctrine I have encountered. She shrugged. "It's just something my dad taught me. He was a Marine too. Omas. Your father is deceased? He will be, if he ever finds out I followed him into the core." She almost smiled. It was a nervous, lopsided thing, but it was real. "He told me to be a doctor. Said I was too soft for combat. Why did you ignore him?" She paused. Her fingers found a loose bolt on the rifle and tightened it without looking. "Because someone has to do the dirty work. And I figured if I'm going to die anyway, I might as well die useful." That was the first time I heard a human say something that made me stop and think. Not because it was profound. Plenty of species had noble-sounding philosophies about death, but because of the way she said it. Like dying useful was not a tragedy. Like it was just another task on a checklist. I left her there, still reassembling her rifle in the dark, and I went back to my command deck to prepare for the siege. The Veth arrived 40 hours ahead of schedule. They came out of slipstream like a scream, a wave of crystalline shards that caught our sensor net completely off guard. There were hundreds of them, each one the size of fighter craft, each one humming with that terrible resonance frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. They did not bother with formations or tactics. They simply flowed towards Station Theta 7 like a river made of broken glass. "All hands to battle stations." I roared, and my Ktharn crew scrambled to their positions with the efficiency of long practice. The cruiser's weapons came online, plasma cannons, kinetic barriers, point defense arrays, and we opened fire. For the first 10 minutes, we held. My gunners were the best in the fleet, and they carved through the Veth advance like a scythe through wheat. Shards exploded into clouds of glittering dust, and the station's defense platforms added their firepower to ours. I allowed myself a moment of hope. Then, the Veth adapted. That was their true terror. They did not just attack, they learned. Every shot we fired, every tactic we used, they absorbed and analyzed and countered. Within 15 minutes, their shard were weaving in patterns that confused our targeting systems. Within 20, they had triangulated the source of our command signals and were focusing their assault on my cruiser's bridge. A resonance bolt slammed into our forward shields, and the deck lurched beneath my feet. Alarm screamed. Smoke poured from a ruptured conduit. Shields at 40%. Zavok shouted. They're focusing fire on our port side. Redirect power from... I started, but another bolt cut me off, this one closer. The viewport cracked. I heard someone, one of my crew, scream as a shard of crystal pierced the hull and embedded itself in his chest. We were losing. I looked at the tactical display and felt my heart sink. The Veth had split into 3 groups, one engaging my cruisers, one swarming the Xylos frigate, and one heading straight for Station Theta 7. The frigate was already dead in the water, its crew evacuating in escape pods. The station's defense platforms were firing, but the Veth were simply absorbing the hits, letting their forward elements shatter while the rest pushed through. Commander Voss, Colonel Webb's voice crackled over the comm. We need you to punch a hole in their formation. Just a small one, big enough to get a dropship through. I stared at the display. The dropship would have to fly directly into the swarm. That is suicide, I said. Yes, sir. It probably is. But we can't fight them from up here. We have to get boots on the ground. Ground? The station is an asteroid. There is no ground. Close enough. Webb's voice was calm. Too calm. Give us 5 minutes, Commander. That's all we ask. I wanted to refuse. Every tactical instinct I had screamed that sending humans into that meat grinder was a waste of lives. But I was out of options. My cruisers were dying. The station was dying. And the Veth were already starting to breach the outer hull. Zavok, I said, concentrate all fire on Vector 7-9er. Give that dropship a window. Zavok looked at me like I had lost my mind. But he obeyed. The Ktharn are not cowards. We are a warrior species, bred for conflict, tempered by centuries of war. But we are also practical. We do not throw lives away on hopeless gestures. We retreat when retreat is wise. We surrender when surrender is logical. That is why we had survived as a species for so long. Humans, I was about to learn, are not practical. The dropship launched from the Stormbreaker's ventral bay, a stubby little craft that looked like a metal brick with engines. It accelerated toward the Veth swarm at full thrust, and I watched on the tactical display as the crystalline shards turned to meet it. Point defense lasers lanced out, destroying 3, 4, 5 of the shards, but more kept coming. The dropship's hull glowed red under the assault. Its port engine flamed out. Its starboard engine followed a second later. And then it crashed into Station Theta 7. Not landed. Crashed. It tore through 2 outer bulkheads, skidded across a cargo bay, and came to rest upside down in a maintenance corridor. The impact should have killed everyone on board. I marked the dropship as destroyed and turned my attention back to the battle. But I was wrong. 90 seconds later, I received a transmission from Station Theta 7's internal network. It was video feed from a security camera in the maintenance corridor. The dropship's hull was cracked open like an egg, and humans were crawling out of it. Not just crawling, moving. They were injured, bleeding, limping, but they were moving with a purpose that made my scales prickle. Colonel Webb was at the front, his left arm hanging useless at his side, shouting orders that I could not hear over the static. And behind him, covered in soot and blood, carrying a weapon that looked too big for her, was Alara Vance. She was not crying anymore. She was not trembling. Her face was blank, almost serene, and she moved through the wreckage with the same precise economy I had seen when she reassembled her rifle in the dark. A Veth shard had penetrated the station's hull nearby, and its resonance frequency was screaming through the corridor, cracking bulkheads and shattering windows. I saw two human soldiers fall to their knees, clutching their heads, blood streaming from their ears. Alara Vance walked straight toward the shard. She raised her rifle, that primitive kinetic slug thrower, and fired. The bullet struck the shard's crystalline surface and ricocheted off, sparking but doing no damage. She fired again. Same result. Again. Again. The shard turned toward her, its resonance frequency spiking, and I realized it was going to kill her. Then, her third shot found the shard's resonance node. I did not know that was what happened until later. I just saw the shard shudder, its surface fracturing in a spiderweb of cracks. And then it exploded. The shock wave knocked Alara Vance off her feet and slammed her into a bulkhead. She lay there for a long moment, not moving. Then she got up. She picked up her rifle, checked it for damage, and started walking again. That was the moment I stopped underestimating humans. But it was not the moment I understood them. That would come later. The siege of Station Theta 7 lasted 11 days. 11 days of constant assault, of resonance frequencies hammering our minds, of hull breaches and fires and the slow, grinding death of hope. Mike Tharn crew performed heroically. I will never say otherwise, but by the fifth day we were running on fumes. The Stormbreaker had lost its primary weapons array. The Xylos frigate was a floating tomb, and the Veth showed no signs of stopping. But the humans held. Not held the line. That would imply a line existed. What the humans did was something else entirely. They turned Station Theta 7 into a labyrinth of traps and kill zones. They used the civilian population as runners and lookouts. They salvaged parts from destroyed Veth shards and built improvised explosives. They fought in the dark, in the vacuum, in corridors flooded with coolant and smoke. They fought while bleeding, while concussed, while running on no sleep and nothing but ration bars and that strange chemical they called caffeine. And Alara Vance became their center. I do not know how it happened. One day, she was the sick recruit who threw up in the toilet. The next, she was the one everyone looked to when the Veth breached another section. Colonel Webb was still in command, but he was wounded. A piece of shrapnel had lodged near his spine, and the human medic, a grim-faced woman named Sergeant Park, had him on so many painkillers that he could barely stand. So Webb gave orders, and Vance made sure they were carried out. She was relentless. That is the only word for it. She would work for 36 hours straight, then sleep for 90 minutes, then wake up and do it again. She carried wounded soldiers twice her size. She crawled through ventilation shafts to plant charges. She talked to the civilian children like she was their favorite aunt, telling them stories and making them laugh even as the station shook around them. I watched her through the security feeds when I could. I did not have time to be impressed. I was too busy trying to keep my ship from falling apart, but I noticed things. The way she never raised her voice. The way she always had a plan, even when the plan was just run faster. The way she looked at the Veth shards, not with fear or hatred, but with a kind of clinical curiosity, like a doctor examining a tumor. On the seventh day, the Veth changed tactics. They stopped sending individual shards. Instead, they sent a convergence, a massive formation of crystals that linked together into a single, pulsating entity the size of a small moon. It drifted towards Station Theta 7 at a slow, inexorable pace, and its resonance frequency was so powerful that it cracked the asteroid's surface from 100 kilometers away. That's it, Zavok said, his voice hollow. That's a planet killer. They used one of those on Avelia Prime. I watched the convergence approach and felt something I had not felt in centuries. Despair. There was no stopping that thing. Our weapons would scratch its surface at best. The station's defenses would be meaningless. Even if we evacuated, the Veth would just follow us, hunting us down one ship at a time. We need to evacuate, I said. Order all remaining personnel to the escape pods. We'll make for the slipstream gate, and no. The voice came from the comm speaker. It was Colonel Webb, but his words were slow and slurred from the painkillers. Colonel, I said, you are in no condition to— We're not leaving, Webb said. Vance has a plan. I stared at the speaker like it had grown a second head. A plan? Against a planet killer? What plan? You'll see. Just give us 24 hours. 24 hours. I looked at the tactical display. The Convergence would reach the station in 18. We do not have 24 hours. Then make time, Commander. Webb's voice was fading, like he was falling asleep even as he spoke. That's what you do, right? You buy time. We'll spend it. The comm went silent. I stood there for a long moment, my four arms hanging at my sides, my mind racing through every possible scenario. And then I did something that surprised even me. I turned to Zavok and said, redirect all remaining power to forward shields. We're going to ram that thing. Zavok's jaw dropped. Commander, that is insane? Yes, but I do not have any better ideas, and apparently the humans are cooking up something even crazier. So we will hold the line. We will buy them their 24 hours. And if we die with our boots on. That was a human saying. I had picked it up from one of the Marines, and I found that I liked it. It had a certain poetry. The Stormbreaker had one good ram left in her. We had used our forward prow as a weapon twice before in this war, and the damage had never been fully repaired. But I ordered the helmsman to set a collision course with the Convergence, and we accelerated to maximum thrust. What followed was the longest 18 hours of my life. The Stormbreaker slammed into the Convergence like a hammer striking a bell. The impact shattered our forward shields, crumpled our prow, and sent shockwaves through every deck. But it also disrupted the Convergence's resonance field, scattering its component shards into disarray. For a few precious hours, the Veth could not maintain their formation. They had to regroup, reform, recalculate. And while they did, the humans worked. I could not see what they were doing. The station's internal cameras had been knocked out by the fighting, and my ship was too damaged to launch Denshot drones. But I felt it. The station's power grid flickered and surged in patterns that made no sense. The asteroid's surface temperature spiked in localized hotspots, and every few hours a small shuttle would launch from the station and fly straight into the Veth swarm, drawing their fire and giving us a few more minutes. Those shuttles were manned by human volunteers. They knew they would not come back. They went anyway. By the 15th hour, the Convergence had reformed. Its resonance frequency was building again, stronger than before, and the station's outer hull was starting to crack. I could hear the Veth's psychic scream through the Stormbreaker's hull, a sound like nails on glass, like broken bones grinding together, like 1,000 voices crying out at once and being silenced. Commander, Zavok said, his voice tight, the station is losing structural integrity. If that Convergence fires another resonance pulse, I know. I opened a channel to the station. Colonel Webb, we are out of time. Whatever your plan is, execute it now. Silence. Then a voice not Webb's but a woman's. Quiet. Calm. Almost gentle. We're ready, Commander. Just get your people clear. It was Alara Vance. Clear. I said, clear of what? Clear of the station. All of it. As far away as you can get. I looked at Zavok. He looked back at me. And for the first time in my long life, I gave an order that made no tactical sense at all. All hands, I said, abandon ship. Bring us to maximum range. Now, my crew did not question me. They had learned by now that humans made commanders do strange things. We evacuated the Stormbreaker in escape pods, abandoning our flagship to drift in the void, and we watched from a safe distance as Station Theta 7 began to shake. The Convergence fired its resonance pulse. The beam of concentrated frequency hit the station dead center, and for a moment, I thought it was over. I thought the asteroid would shatter, the humans would die, and the Veth would roll over us like a tide of broken glass. But the station did not shatter. It glowed. The human engineers had done something impossible. They had wired the station's reactor core into the asteroid's natural mineral lattice, turning the entire rock into a massive resonator. When the Veth's pulse hit, the station did not absorb the energy, it amplified it. The pulse bounced back toward the convergence, doubled in intensity, carrying with it not just the Veth's frequency, but hundreds of human-generated frequencies layered on top, like a chorus of angry voices. The convergence tried to adapt. It always adapted. But it could not adapt to this because this was not a weapon. This was a feedback loop, a resonant cascade, a mathematical paradox given physical form. The Veth's hive mind relied on perfect synchronization, on every shard singing the same note at the same time. The humans had just introduced 100 different notes, all of them wrong, all of them screaming. The convergence tore itself apart. I watched, my heart's pounding, as the planet killer fractured into millions of pieces. The shards tried to flee, tried to reconnect, but the chaotic frequencies kept coming, pouring out of the station in waves. Within minutes, the entire Veth swarm had been reduced to glittering dust, drifting in the void like snow. Station Theta 7 was still there. Cracked, bleeding atmosphere, sections of it open to space, but still there. And on its surface, standing in a breached cargo bay with no helmet and a smile on her face, was Alara Vance. She had survived. They all had. The humans. The civilians. Even Colonel Webb, who was later carried out on a stretcher, complaining the whole way that he had missed the good part. 200 human Marines had gone into that station. 183 came out. The Ktharn had not lost so few. The Xylos had lost all but a handful. But the humans? The humans had turned a suicide mission into a victory. And Alara Vance had led them. The war did not end at Station Theta 7. The Veth Collective was too vast, too old, too patient to be defeated by a single battle. But something changed that day. Something fundamental. The Veth stopped advancing. For the first time in 3,000 years, the crystalline hive mind paused. Scout ships reported that the Veth were pulling back from the Meridian Corridor, regrouping in the outer systems. Running? What? Diagnostics? Simulations? Fear? I did not know. No one knew. But I had a guess. 2 weeks after the battle, I received a priority transmission from the Galactic Assembly. They wanted a briefing. They wanted to know how a ragtag group of humans had held off a planet killer. They wanted to know what the humans had done to the Veth psyche. I told them I did not know, but I said I knew someone who might. The Assembly arranged a meeting on neutral ground, a Xylos diplomatic station orbiting a dead star. The representatives from a dozen species were there, along with military commanders, scientists, and diplomats. They all wanted to see the human who had become, in the space of 11 days, the most feared soldier in the galaxy. Alara Vance arrived late. She walked into the conference chamber wearing her standard-issue uniform, which was still stained with soot and something that might have been blood. Her face was pale, and she was limping slightly. A piece of shrapnel had taken a chunk out of her calf, and she had refused to let the medics grow it back until the debriefing was over. She looked in that moment like exactly what she was, a 22-year-old kid who had been through hell and was too tired to pretend otherwise. The Assembly representatives stared at her, some with awe, some with confusion. One, a haughty Avelian priestess, actually sniffed and turned away as if disappointed that humanity's champion was so unimpressive. Vance ignored them all. She walked to the center of the chamber, stood at attention, and waited. I was the first to speak. "Recruit Vance," I said, using her formal rank because I did not know what else to call her. "The Assembly has questions. They want to know how you survived, how you defeated the Veth convergence, and why the Veth have stopped their advance." She looked at me with those pale blue eyes. For a moment, I saw the scared kid who had thrown up on my ship. Then I saw the soldier who had walked toward a Veth shard with nothing but a rifle and a bad attitude. "With respect, Commander," she said, "the Veth didn't stop because of what we did. They stopped because of what they saw." "What did they see?" the Avelian priestess asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Vance turned to face her. They saw a species that would rather turn itself into a bomb than surrender. They saw soldiers who kept fighting after their legs were gone, after their eyes were gone, after their minds were gone. They saw a bunch of apes from a backwater planet who looked at a god-killing superweapon and said, "That's cute. Hold my beer." Several of the representatives exchanged confused glances. The human expression did not translate well. But more than that, Vance continued, her voice softening. They saw something they had never seen before. Something their hive mind could not process. "What?" I asked. She smiled. It was a small, tired, almost sad smile. Sacrifice. Not strategic sacrifice. Not calculated loss, but idiotic, irrational, completely unnecessary sacrifice. They saw 117 human volunteers fly shuttles into their swarm, knowing they would die, knowing it wouldn't change the outcome, just to buy us a few more minutes. They saw a medic named Park use her own body to shield a child from a resonance blast. They saw a colonel who should have been unconscious give orders for 2 straight days because he refused to let his people down. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. The Veth have never encountered a species that values each individual life so highly and yet throws those lives away so freely. They cannot reconcile it. It broke their logic, and until they figure out how to understand us, they can't move forward. The chamber was silent. Even the Avelian priestess had stopped sneering. I looked at Alara Vance, and I finally understood. The humans had not won at Station Theta 7 because they were stronger or smarter or better armed. They had won because they were insane. Not insane in the clinical sense, but insane in the way that all humans are insane, driven by emotions that made no logical sense, willing to die for strangers, willing to fight for hopeless causes, willing to stare into the abyss and spit in its face. The Veth Collective had spent 3,000 years conquering species that fought with tactics and strategy and self-preservation. They had never encountered a species that fought with heart, and they had no idea what to do about it. The war continued for another year. The Veth never regained their momentum. They launched probing attacks, tested our defenses, tried to find weaknesses. But every time they encountered humans, something strange happened. The humans would fight. They would bleed. They would die. And then they would keep fighting even when there was no logical reason to do so. And the Veth would pull back in confusion. Eventually, the assembly brokered a ceasefire. The Veth agreed to retreat to their original territory, leaving the Meridian Corridor and the core worlds alone. In exchange, humanity agreed to serve as the corridor's permanent guardians, a role they accepted with a shrug and a request for better coffee. Alara Vance was promoted to lieutenant. She refused. She said she preferred being a recruit because it meant no one expected her to give speeches. She stayed on Station Theta 7, helping to rebuild, and when I asked her why she didn't want to go home, she said something that has stayed with me ever since. Home is where people need you, Commander. And right now, these people need me more than Mars does. I think about that sometimes. About how the galaxy looked at humanity and saw a weak, primitive, emotionally unstable species. About how the Veth looked at humanity and saw an incomprehensible threat. About how I looked at a sick, trembling recruit and saw nothing worth saving. I was wrong. We were all wrong. The Veth called Alara Vance their biggest danger. But they were wrong too. She was not the danger. She was just a messenger. The danger was humanity itself. The last time I saw Alara Vance, she was sitting on the hull of Station Theta 7, her legs dangling over the edge of the universe, eating a ration bar and watching the stars. I floated beside her in my environmental suit, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "You know what the scariest part is, Commander? What? The Veth think we're crazy. And maybe we are. But here's the thing about crazy people. We don't know when to quit. We don't know when we're beaten. We don't know that we're supposed to lie down and die." She took a bite of her ration bar and chewed thoughtfully. So the Veth can run their simulations and calculate their odds and plan their strategies. And every time, the math will tell them that we should lose. But the math doesn't know about the kid from Mars who learned to reassemble her rifle in the dark. The math doesn't know about the medic who shielded a child with her own body. The math doesn't know about the 117 volunteers who flew into a swarm of death just to buy their friends 5 more minutes. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw the universe. Not the cold, mathematical universe that the Veth worshipped, but the messy, emotional, beautiful universe that humanity had dragged into the stars. That's why they called me their biggest danger, she said. Not because I'm special, because I'm typical. I'm what happens when a human decides that dying useful is better than living scared. And there are 8 billion more just like me back on Earth. She stood up, brushed the crumbs off her uniform, and saluted me with 2 fingers, a human gesture I had learned meant respect. Take care of yourself, Commander. And if you ever need us again, just ask. She climbed back into the airlock and was gone. I floated there for a long time, watching the stars, feeling something I had never felt before. It was not fear. It was not respect. It was something quieter, deeper, more profound. It was the realization that the galaxy had been wrong about humanity. And humanity, in its beautiful, stubborn, impossible way, had just proved us all fools. I smiled. It was not a cathartic expression, but I had been around humans long enough to learn it. Then, I turned, fired my suit's thrusters, and flew back to my ship. There was a war to finish. And for the first time in 3,000 years, I thought we might actually win. Not because we were stronger, but because we had the humans. And the humans? They did not know how to lose.